All right, we are live. Welcome in, everybody. This is episode 142 of the Kalibrated live show with your host, of course, Scott. Today, we are joined once again we are joined once again by, we are joined once again by Brian Berletic from the New Atlas. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I accidentally had I accidentally had the YouTube tab open and started playing. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. I just stuttered introducing you 4 times, so
No worries.
We're all making mistakes out here today. Brian, how have you been?
I'm doing well, but I feel increasingly frustrated because, and I think you will agree with me that it's getting more and more obvious where U.S. foreign policy is headed, which is where it is always headed: the pursuit of primacy at the expense of any prospect of peace. It is so obvious right now, but as it becomes more obvious, the people who are supporting President Trump are descending deeper and deeper into just unreal delusion. They're coming up with excuses where, people saying this before Trump got into office, people would say, well, you're insane. You're supporting Biden. You're supporting his war on Yemen. You're supporting this continued agitation of China. And now they are starting to adopt these views because now the Trump administration, as predicted, it wasn't a lucky guess. They said they were going to do this. For people who are listening, they said they were going to do this, and now they are doing it. They're going to war with Yemen, ultimately aiming at Iran. They, just as you pointed out, Scott, they finished rearming Israel. And as soon as they got all their 2,000-pound bombs from the United States, they started dropping them on the Palestinians again, predictably. And everyone was hailing this ceasefire by Trump as if this is the first time there has ever been a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. People aren't paying attention. This is what Israel always does. They brutalize the Palestinians using Hamas as an excuse. It is not as if Hamas isn't doing anything to invite it. But then there's this fighting, there's this devastation. The Palestinian civilian population pays the highest price in the conflict. And then there's a ceasefire where Israel rearms. Whatever was being done using that conflict as a smokescreen is done. And then they just, maybe a year or two later, they go right back at it. This is a little sooner than usual, but it was inevitable that they would go back at it. And now they are. And all of this is taking place as the Trump administration is more and more transparently falsely pursuing peace with Russia. And we can see even Russia itself kind of wiggling out of the ceasefire, this Minsk III that they're trying to impose on Russia. So that's how I'm doing right now. I'm very frustrated with this because as it gets more obvious, people are more stubbornly ignoring what is happening.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a wake up call for me. I think this is sort of the first time I've actually seen this play out. Maybe I have in the past and I just didn't notice it, but for the first time I've watched so Trump's first term was the first term I was able to vote for, basically. Then I got to watch Biden. And this is when I was hyper focused on, geopolitics and foreign policy and stuff like that. And then watching Trump come back in, and I can tell everybody in this chat who's watching this right now, and everybody who listens, and Brian, you know this, U.S. foreign policy does not change with the president. There are absolute mandatory minimums when it comes to geostrategic interests for the United States and maintaining hegemony that can't go by the wayside. And if they do, the U.S. will fall out of that hegemony. And so that they're not going to let that happen. And watching average people, or even not average people who are actually focused on this topic and watching this, as you say, bend their reality, shift the goalposts so much. If you would have told Trump supporters who voted for Trump, according to his foreign policy promises, that he was going to be a non-interventionalist, he was going to stop the war in Gaza, stop the war in Ukraine, this, that, or the other, you're looking at this and it's the exact opposite. He's continuing with Biden-era policies. He's bombing Yemen like Obama did. Like, I don't know if Bush did. I know Obama did. I know Biden did. Continuing a decades-long pattern in Yemen, threatening Iran, heightening sanctions on Russia, increasing European military spending. I just hope everybody can eventually wake up to this reality of what is happening. Nothing is changing. Tulsi Gabbard just came out and openly, justified the strikes on Yemen, which is just a hilarious sight to behold after she was supposed to be the like you said, Brian, checks and balances of this administration, with regards to neocon policy and stuff like that. And we're just not seeing it. The US is a uniparty system. It is a massive machine, and normal people really need to start waking up to this and understanding that what we do around the globe will never change. We will continue down this path. There might be different routes that we take, but the end goal and the end objectives are all the same. So yes, I totally agree. It's been extremely frustrating watching people who I would have considered rather intelligent not being able to see the facts directly in front of their face. And it's not complicated. They tell you exactly what they're doing.
Yes, and I will go back because now it has almost completely gone full circle. I warned people right after U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth laid out his directive on February 12th this year. He said, expand NATO funding from 2% of your GDP to 5%. They're all working in that direction. All of Europe is working in that direction. He said, expand your military industrial output and expand the shipment of arms and ammunition to Ukraine. Does that sound like someone interested in ending the conflict? No, perpetuating it. And that is what Europe is doing. And he said, prepare, any security guarantee, this is a direct quote, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. When they say non-European troops, they mean Canada, basically. And it needs to be a non-NATO mission, no Article 5, because the US needs to pivot to Asia Pacific and do the exact same thing they've just done in Eastern Europe versus Russia. They need to do the exact same thing to China. And he even said a division of labor. And now every single thing that he laid out is now happening. And I have people telling me, no, he never said that. And then when I show them that he actually said that, they say, well, maybe he's going behind President Trump's back, and I'm saying no, he's not. This is exactly this. I'm a bit older than you, Scott, and I have watched this play out from Bush, 8 years of Obama, Trump, Biden, and now Trump, and it just goes around in a circle. Has gone in a complete circle 2 times, where the U.S. starts wars with Russia by proxy, pretends that they want to fix everything so they can regroup, reorganize, and start the whole process all over again. So now we've done one complete cycle. Now we're almost at the end of another. They want to create some sort of fake peace with Russia so that they can reorganize. We all admit that they've lost this proxy war at this moment.
They admit it.
Yes, they admit it. At this point, everyone has admitted. And they started admitting this even toward the end of the Biden administration. They said that they were loose. So this isn't something that, suddenly President Trump is changing everything. They had to do this. They had to salvage this because it was a lost cause. They need to freeze it. So it is a combination of Minsk 3.0 and a Syria-style buffer zone. This is what they're getting ready to set up. And what President Trump himself and his administration, what they are doing is trying to corner Russia into a ceasefire that Europe is openly preparing to send troops into amid, hoping that Russia isn't going to restart hostilities and target European troops at the same time. People are saying, if the European troops go in there, Russia will target them immediately. What if it is under the cover of a ceasefire? They're just going to break the ceasefire to shoot at European troops. That just think about how much of a corner that would back Russia into. And maybe they will do it, but that will be them fighting out of a very deep corner that they painted themselves into. So this is the transparent process that is taking place. And as you say, there's people who it's not that they can't see it. They want to pretend that they're not seeing it. They need, for some reason, they need to believe that this isn't happening, but it's happening. We're telling you that's how we warned you, and now it's happening. It's happening.
And it's not just like globally. It's not like Syria. You're talking about like, that sort of proxy battle that they had there, and all of the different references you're making. But this has happened 3 times, or this would be the 3rd time this has happened in Ukraine. Yes. It happened in 2014, it happened in 2015, and it almost happened at Istanbul in 2022 as well. I mean, if they would have agreed to that, do you think any of that would have held at all? No. So this is just I'm truly at this point, if Putin buys into this and goes along with this again, I'm going to be so hypercritical of this deal in my analysis, because if it happens, because of, what it obviously will mean. We'll be back here, whether it's in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, or 8 years, we'll be back in this exact same spot talking about these exact same issues, just with a different president, and people will be talking about how it's going to be different this time or whatever. And it is very frustrating. Let's get to the phone conversation. Putin and Trump held a 2.5-hour phone conversation where they discussed a potential ceasefire or a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. The readouts, the U.S. readout and the Russian readout, are very different. The U.S. readout had a bunch of, it sounded really good for the U.S., made the negotiating team sound strong, or made Trump sound strong, and entailed something specifically. They talked about Iran and Israel in the U.S. readout, but in the Russian readout, there was no mention of Iran and Israel. Another difference between the 2 readouts was that the Russian readout specifically mentioned the complete cessation of armaments to Ukraine and intelligence sharing. The U.S. readout did not mention that at all. So these are 2 very, very key points here that I think read to or tell a much larger story. But I would like your opinion on this phone conversation and how you think both sides took it, and what do you think it means going forward?
People are hailing this as some sort of major breakthrough, but in reality, what Russia is doing is they're being slippery fish. They're slipping out of the hands of the United States, who wants to corner them and impose a Minsk III plus Syria-style buffer zone on them. And when you really look at what President Putin agreed to, this ceasefire on energy and infrastructure targets, almost all of that is destroyed in Ukraine anyway. So it's not as if they're discontinuing all hostilities. They will continue hammering the Ukrainian military, degrading its fighting capacity as they have been. And this is what is so key for Russia and its military operations. But they'll take a month off from these large-scale missile strikes on energy infrastructure, which happens about once a month anyway, right? If I'm not mistaken, they usually do this once a month. So they're not really agreeing to anything.
They actually haven't been doing a lot of the big missile strikes lately. Like it hasn't been a real. So yeah, when you're talking about like how this affects the battlefield for Russia, the weather is already warming. They don't need to strike energy infrastructure really anymore. It's not going to have the same effect as it has in the winter months. And then on top of that, it specifically curtails Ukrainian operations. But continue.
Yes. And I don't know when this 1 month starts, because I think I just saw Ukraine carry out another drone strike on a Russian oil facility. So this is going to tie Ukraine's hands more than it will Russia's. And again, the whole point is for Russia to appear to go along with this, knowing what is being attempted to be imposed upon them. They want to appear as approaching this in good faith, and I think they are. If there ever was any sort of opportunity for real peace, I think they would take it. They don't. If they could end this in their favor without continuing to fight, I think that they would. But I think they know that that's not going to happen. Just not taking any steps at all to wind down the special military operation. And the other issue, this thing about Iran and Israel in the phone call, I think if you look at the way they worded it, the U.S. worded it, is extremely bizarre. They're saying Iran should not be allowed to be in any position to destroy Israel, which is not something that Iran has ever said they wanted to do. Their problem is not with Israel, the people of Israel. Their problem is with the government and their policies. And they have always made that very clear. This is a myth that the U.S. repeats to justify its aggression and hostility towards Iran, to help generate public hatred toward Iran. But it's also something that a lot of pro-Palestinian people cling to, despite it being a U.S. government propaganda point. They like to believe this because they themselves want to see Israel destroyed. But this is not something that Iran has ever said it wanted to do. They don't have some sort of irrational, unyielding hostility towards Jewish people in general. They have the largest population of Jews in the region outside of Israel, inside Iran itself. So it was a very bizarrely worded statement. Like you said, it wasn't. You're saying that it wasn't in the Russian readout. Yeah. I see people arguing online about this, but it's irrelevant because it's not something that Iran wanted to do anyway. So even if Russia did agree to that, they're just agreeing to something Iran itself agrees to.
Yeah.
Iran having nuclear weapons does not mean Iran annihilating Israel. The whole purpose of having nuclear weapons, if they were pursuing them, is as a form of deterrence. Look at Iran. Look at how the U.S. at one point had tens of thousands of troops on either side of their eastern and western borders. Look at how they're still being targeted by the U.S. and their Israeli proxies. Look at how the U.S. and its Israeli proxies are targeting Iranian allies throughout the region. Yemen, for example, Hezbollah, Syria has been completely destroyed. So looking at that doesn't people try to depict Iran as being out of control and insane, and they want nuclear weapons for nefarious reasons. They have very legitimate reasons for wanting nuclear weapons. And then at the end of the day, the U.S. making this an issue as the only country in human history to use nuclear weapons against another nation twice. It's just surreal that this is even still a talking point or a narrative that anyone with a functioning brain accepts.
Yeah, and it's very clear that it's obvious why Israel doesn't want Iran to have nukes, because
Yes.
instantly Iran has a deterrent to Israel. They're not worried about Tel Aviv getting nuked. That has never been the Iranian position. They have never. They during some of the heated exchanges, it was a little bit more tense, but even then, their strikes were incredibly restrained. They didn't go after anything significant the entire time. They made a show of it more than a actual strike. So yeah, no, I agree. I think that I don't think people will ever wake up, but I wish that people would wake up to this. And here, one of the people in the chat just said this, and this is so funny. These guys don't want the conflict to end because they won't have a job, which is hilarious because for anybody who doesn't know Brian's work, Brian had a job doing this exact same thing before this war started.
Yes.
And for me, this isn't my job, so that doesn't make any sense there. But also, the funniest part about all of this is you're saying we don't want the conflict to end. We do want the conflict to end. We want it to actually end. And what's being prescribed right now is a temporary secession that will restart as soon as they're ready. We saw it with Minsk 1. We saw it with Minsk 2. So we do want peace, but we actually want peace, not fake nonsense, runaround garbage. So,
yes. And you can see that guy in the comment section. He's just trolling. He's just
of course
to pick a fight. He's not thinking rationally. He's not making any sort of rational.
But I see those comments all the time. Stuff like that. Yes. Like, oh, we don't.
They're made in bad faith because, like you have pointed out, like I pointed out, they don't want to accept the reality of what is happening, and they don't want people like us to keep telling them what is actually happening. It is essentially them covering their ears, covering their eyes, and making noises so they won't even catch a glimpse of what we're saying, because
and I don't even think we're saying anything. It's like it's so funny too, because we're not saying anything highly inflammatory. We're not saying it's really anybody's fault. We're blaming a big sort of monstrous bureaucracy. It's not like you're saying, oh, Americans are bad, or Israelis are bad, or Ukrainians or Russians or any of that. You're saying that there are a few elite people who have extreme wealth that are controlling everything, wealth and power controlling everything. And time and time again, you see these patterns repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. And yeah, for not being extremist to one end or the other, we tend to get a lot of hate for just telling people exactly what's happening. And it's a crazy thing to me that I'll never be able to wrap my head around, I don't think. But talking about the implementation of any of this, I've seen a lot of people talking about, oh, the ceasefire has already been agreed upon. And then, as you said, I don't know when that 30 days goes into effect, but we've already seen Ukraine striking a refinery, which is true. And I would just like to mention, I don't think anything has been officially agreed upon. I haven't even heard really a Ukrainian or European response to this phone call that happened. So I'm waiting for that. I would be interested to see how the Ukrainians respond. But do you believe that the Ukrainians will give up the territory that's required if they believe that European peacekeepers will be introduced into the country?
Oh, they'll do whatever they're told to do, because they're proxies. They don't do anything. They're not doing anything. Everything that they're doing is a directive of the collective West, the United States in particular, and it is all enabled by the US. And as President Trump himself has demonstrated, at least in principle, he can cut off arms and all forms of support at any time of his choosing. Now, in reality, he never actually did that.
Yeah.
But he said that he was going to do that. He could have done it if he wanted to. He didn't actually do it. But this in and of itself should be a wake-up call to people who listened to President Trump say he was going to end this conflict in the first 24 hours, which he's now saying he said sarcastically, or it was hyperbole or whatever. But he actually could have announced in the first 24 hours of his time in office policies that would have ultimately ended the conflict. Because as everyone has pointed out, this was always a U.S. proxy war against Russia. And nothing else. There is nothing else to this. The U.S. started it. They could stop it at any time of their choosing. President Trump is choosing not to stop it. He is choosing to continue this. He is choosing to play these games with Russia. He is obviously choosing to impose this Minsk III framework on Russia. And another thing that people should keep in mind is the whole fact that he and his administration continuously say, we need to end this conflict with Russia so we can pivot to China. Pivot to China to do what? The exact same thing. Does that sound like a country that is genuinely interested in peace, or a country that is bitten off more than it can chew? It wants to put a pause on this, take care of China, and then circle back around for Russia. And Scott, you made a very important point on X, and I shared that post where you were talking about how Trump detonated this ceasefire between Israel and Palestine. He greenlighted it. He rearmed Israel and then greenlighted this conflict with Palestine. And Russia has to be looking at that and saying, wait a minute, you just made a peace deal, a ceasefire, you rearmed Israel, and then you allowed it to begin all over again.
Yeah. The day before the phone call. The day before the phone call.
Yes. So what must Russia be thinking? And does anyone think that Russia is blind to this? And I do see some Trump supporters who have been unconditionally supporting him up until now, pausing for thought. I don't think they've come fully around to accepting that this is outright continuity of agenda. Nothing is changing, but they are pausing for thought, seeing this in Palestine, this brutality against the Palestinians, and also the U.S. expanding this war on Yemen and threatening war with Iran. I think they're pausing for thought and thinking about this. Anyone who has been supporting Trump up until now must. But I do see people out there making excuses. The worst excuse of them all is President Trump said he wanted to make peace with Russia, not with pirates. So they're calling Yemen a bunch of pirates and insinuating that Yemen is just irrationally out of the blue for no reason at all, just attacking ships in the Red Sea and what people forget is that this all began in 2011. Actually, it goes back much further than that, but let's just start at 2011 when the U.S. initiated regime change operations across the entire Arab world, from North Africa to the Middle East, overthrowing the government in Libya, a NATO intervention, and then a U.S.-backed proxy war in Syria that has finally culminated in the destruction of Syria just at the end of last year. They also overthrew the government of Yemen in 2011. Do people remember that? And then for 9 years, almost an entire decade, the U.S. backed a brutal proxy war against Yemen via Saudi Arabia and its neighbors. And it was essentially the U.S. doing everything but fighting the war themselves. They even had Americans on the ground, contractors fixing the warplanes. They had U.S. intelligence picking out the targets. They had U.S. special forces in Yemen designating targets on the ground. That was the extent that this proxy war was being fought. And so, no, Yemen is not just out of the blue attacking or picking a fight with the U.S. The U.S. is there in the region, have been for decades, burning it all down and targeting Yemen specifically, also targeting Yemen's allies. So they're fighting back against a real threat, an unjustifiable threat. So this is excuse making.
Yeah, Yemen and the Houthis have actually been one of the only countries, along with like Hezbollah, but that has actually been putting a pressure on Israel or on the West through the shipping lane, targeting, which is obviously going to cause a reaction like we've seen from the U.S. But it is interesting that we can't seem to get out of these forever wars, man. We love getting stuck in the Middle East. It's just like our favorite thing to do.
And just think about it. What right does the U.S. have to be there in the first place? And President Trump said he there are people digging up his old posts regarding the Middle East, how it's dumb, it's a waste of money, it's a disaster, we should never have gotten involved. And then when it's his turn, he jumps in head first, into this shallow pool of endless conflict. And he's doing it on purpose because it is not about peace instead of primacy. It has always been primacy over peace, and it will continue to be so. Again, look at his cabinet. Look at the people he voluntarily picked: Rubio, Hegseth, Waltz, Radcliffe, a managing partner of Soros's funds, hedge funds. I mean, come on. I mean, wake up. And people were telling me, well, he's got Tulsi Gabbard. She'll be this check and balance. And now she's foaming at the mouth for war with Yemen also, which was entirely predictable, because in the past, she has said some things that you might interpret as being anti-war. But then on other occasions, she's been totally okay with war. So and then the whole fact that she agreed to join an administration lined with warmongering neocons tells you something about her principles or lack thereof. And now she's demonstrating it for all to see. So it's a wake up call. The U.S. could leave the Middle East anytime it wanted. All of these conflicts are its doing. It has created Israel and perpetuates Israel as a hostile forward operating base in the region. At any time, the U.S. could cut support to Israel. These neighboring countries do not want perpetual war with Israel. A lot of these countries are already trying to create some sort of relationship with Israel. Yeah. Russia and China want this to happen. So it's not as if they're going to be helpless and at the mercy of hostile forces. They could join a community of nations in that region. The U.S. is choosing to perpetuate this strategy of tension in the region.
And then also, just on your topic of cabinet choices by Trump, listening to Marco Rubio talk about multipolarism the other day. Oh man, dude. I was sitting there rolling. I couldn't believe I'm listening to Marco Rubio talk about a multipolar world. I just dumbfounded. I
So he's
couldn't
talking
believe
about it. He was talking about it again, or was this the comment he made a month or two ago about multipolarism?
It might have been a little while ago. Yeah.
And look, him admitting that there's a multipolar world doesn't mean he accepts it or isn't going to try to overturn it.
Yeah.
He said it's a multipolar world. There's other nations we can't just roll over anymore. That is just recognizing fact. It doesn't mean that he's going to accept that and find a constructive role for the U.S. within it. He clearly isn't. He's clearly laying out a strategy to reassert American dominance over multipolarism.
And it's also interesting because I kind of lost what I was going to say, honestly. I had something there. I had something really good I was going to add to that. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was saying we can continue talking about Marco Rubio and all of the things that he has been saying. People have pointed out this comment he made about multipolarism, but and they're like, look at him talking about peace with Russia.
I remembered.
Go ahead. I don't want.
I was just going to say. I was going to change the topic a little bit. I was going to say, I'm beginning to see this portion of history right now. This intersection with Iran, with China, and with Russia. I really do believe, since we're talking about multipolarism, that this is sort of the first real big test of multipolarism. The Russians in Europe have put the U.S. and NATO into a position where they're forced to negotiate, right? Which is not something necessarily new. Minsk 1, Minsk 2, but it was the support wasn't really the same. Russia wasn't as involved. So now we're seeing a direct proxy war where the U.S. has almost no leverage in negotiations, trying to convince Russia to join this Minsk 3 agreement again. And then we also have Iran basically shutting down all diplomacy with the United States. Everything I've seen coming out of Iran is basically, no, we're not going to agree to anything. We're not talking about with you about anything. And so I really do see this as a big initial test of this idea of multipolarism, to see if this is actually developing, which I do believe it is, or if we're going to see the U.S. be able to retain its hegemony through this. Do you sort of see this as in the same way? I'm curious as to your thoughts.
Yes. Well, I mean, think about it from Iran's point of view. Here's President Trump offering to make some sort of deal with Iran after he himself unilaterally abandoned the nuclear deal in his first administration, and then proceeded to murder one of their senior ranking generals, Qasem Soleimani, who was fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda all across the region, up to the day he was murdered by a U.S. drone strike. So why would Iran ever deal with President Trump? Why would anyone on earth deal with President Trump? He has a demonstrated history of unilaterally withdrawing from deals, even treaties, based on lies. He withdrew from an arms control treaty with Russia based on absolute lies, baseless accusations that he made against Russia. And it was all part of continuity of agenda too. It wasn't just some idea that popped into his head one day. He said, hey, let's withdraw from the intermediate range nuclear force treaty. Let's just do that. No, it was part of a pattern that began under the Bush Jr. administration. And it was always about withdrawing from these arms treaties, creating and deploying these weapon systems to further encircle and contain both Russia and China and everybody in between. So this was something that President Trump did deliberately as part of continuity of agenda, not because he woke up one day and decided to do that, or his advisors all just suddenly one day thought it was a good idea. It was because this is something the U.S. is working on, regardless of who is in the White House and regardless of who controls Congress. So yeah, no, I do. This is the multipolar world is emerging, and this is a test because the U.S. the empire is striking back, so to speak. It is trying to disrupt, divide, and destroy multipolarism. And you could see them setting the stage for an extremely devastating blow that you can see them preparing for it. This whole thing with the Panama Canal, Greenland, this President Trump announcing to the American people in his address to Congress, we need to massively expand our naval fleet. To do what? What are you doing with that? And it's so obvious. He himself, Vice President J.D. Vance, all of these people in his administration have repeatedly said this obsession with the Panama Canal and Greenland, the South China Sea, this is all about maritime shipping routes. And this is the only way that they can actually really deliver a devastating, fatal blow to China. They cannot attack China head on. They don't have the military power to do that. So what they're going to do instead is use their massive global spanning military to cut off Chinese maritime shipping while they have already been arming and backing terrorists all across Eurasia on the landmass, attacking Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure. And we're still seeing terrorism in Pakistan targeting the China-Pakistan economic corridor. There's an ongoing war in Myanmar the U.S. is backing, including through U.S. aid and the National Endowment for Democracy, even though they've been dismantled. No, they haven't. Secretary Rubio even recently came out and said that there's 1,000 programs that continue to be funded, and it's all been consolidated under the State Department. And I know we haven't brought this up, Scott, but I just wanted to talk about Project 2025, which President Trump went out of his way to distance himself from. But if you have read it, he's literally going down the list and just checking off each agenda there. And there's under the State Department, they talk all about how USAID, Voice of America, all of these organizations are outdated. They need to be cut down, consolidated, streamlined, and reinvented. And that is literally what President Trump is now doing step by step, exactly as Project 2025 laid out. And it's not because now they want to pursue world peace. It is because they want to double down on pursuing primacy, and they want to sharpen the tools that they have used over the years to pursue primacy. They want to sharpen them because they need to pursue it more effectively, because their grip on primacy is slipping more and more.
Yeah, I get into a little bit of prediction here. How do you see this negotiated ceasefire talk with Ukraine playing out? Because it's obvious what the sides want. The West wants to stop. They want to push Western troops into the country to then prevent it from restarting. Basically, you kind of solidify the Russian position, or you solidify the Ukrainian and Russian positions. And then, it's frozen, and it'll remain frozen for a long time while those troops are there. And exactly as you said, Russia won't be able to, I mean, they could strike European troops, but you're then stopping a ceasefire and engaging what are NATO troops practically out of nowhere. So, I mean, it seems like the trap is set, and it's up to Russia to decide if they want to walk into that trap. Do you see the Kremlin, playing this out as long as they can? Do you see them outright saying no eventually, or do you think that there's going to be some sort of agreed upon settlement?
It's impossible there's not going to be any genuine peace. This is a trap. It is a trap. The U.S. has no interest in peace. President Trump demonstrably has no interest or desire for peace. So we can rule that out completely. What we cannot rule out is whether or not Russia is going to accept this. They accepted Minsk 1 and 2. I'm almost certain that they knew both of those were traps. And I think they accepted it because they calculated they could use time more efficiently than Ukraine could, because they needed time. I mean, you look at when the special military operation began, there were still a lot of things that Russia did not have prepared, but they delayed it for as long as possible. And they launched the special military operation before it was too late to do it, but before they were fully prepared. I guess you could argue that you're never fully prepared for something like that, but there were a lot of things that they still needed to do. And as Mark Sloboda always points out, Russia didn't mobilize its its population yet. And that's something that they ended up having to do to a certain extent, but they weren't able to do that until the special military operation was launched first. So if they accept any sort of deal, they will do so in the knowledge that it is a trap, but calculating that they can use that time more efficiently than the collective West can. And you also have to calculate how the world is going to change over the course of the years this frozen conflict will remain within. Will the dynamics in the world change in favor of Russia, China, and the multipolar world? Or will the US be able to reassert itself? And this is something that maybe, you're in the Kremlin and you have access to information that you and I don't.
Yeah.
Despite people claiming that we're Putin puppets, I don't get a weekly briefing from the Kremlin, so I don't know. So that's what remains to be seen. If they do agree to it, though, that is the reason why. It's not because President Putin thinks the U.S. wants peace. And I mean, if Russia did, that would be disastrous. And you would see Russia laid into the shallow grave the U.S. has already dug for it. And then you would watch multipolarism laid in the shallow grave right next to it soon after. So that would be a disaster if Russia really did fall for this.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like we're kind of talking in circles. I feel like every time we're on here, we have to, and it's like with new information too. We get new information, and our live streams don't change. Think
about it, Scott. Think about it. You see the tone in the comment section today.
Oh yeah,
is 180 degrees, not quite 360 degrees, to previous live streams where everyone in the comment section was saying, you're wrong, Trump is different, he's going to change everything. I think the majority of people are starting to wake up to that. You still have people, maybe not a majority, but a large number of people are waking up to this. They can clearly see it. It's very hard for them to argue that real change is happening when they're watching everything just unfold again, as always. So yes, we're repeating ourselves, and people complain that I repeat myself, but we're reporting the truth. We're not trying to entertain people. We're not writing a script to entertain people. We are informing you of the truth, and the truth does not change. So if it was true the last time we did a live stream, it's going to be true this time. If Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth really did lay out this directive, which he did, we all heard him say it, and Europe is going down the list, checking each one off in turn and implementing it. If that started in February, it's going to continue all throughout this month, all throughout next month, until this plan runs its full course. So, of course, we're repeating ourselves, but there's a really good reason for that. And people that find themselves changing their tune often as the Trump administration continues doing the things that it's doing, I mean, they should stop and ask themselves why that is. Why you find yourself backpedaling, making excuses. I mean, the excuses are so, I don't know how to describe it. It's just destroying the dignity of these people who are making them. And I feel bad for them. And I feel, these are honest people who wanted to see something good happen, and they cannot accept that it isn't happening. That is sad. That is sad. And you and I mean, we're watching this happen. We're warning people that it's happening. We understand how bleak things are, and it is difficult. It is depressing. I'm not going to deny it. It's not as if I don't want to see things improve. I'm at the receiving end of U.S. interference and the pursuit of primacy. I'm here in Asia. I have watched U.S.-backed terrorists try to burn the capital city here down twice, back to back, from 2009 to 2010. I've watched it, and I've had friends that had to flee the country for a year. I know people that have gotten hurt. I have actually heard grenades go off when all of this was going on. So I really want this to end, but I can't lie to myself and say that it is ending when it isn't, because that's a great way to wake up one day in the middle of a fire that you couldn't see coming because you didn't want to see it coming.
Yeah, this is what makes me so confident in my position too, is that from my personal standpoint, I know that I don't have any horse in this race at all. I don't give a what happens. Like, I mean, if the U.S. wins, I come out better on the better end of it, right? If the U.S. maintains its hegemony, I'm going to be sitting here and nothing is going to change for me. Things are going to continue, and that's fine. And so when I'm looking at this and I continue saying the same thing, and I hear you saying the same things, and all of these things end up continuously coming true, and we're back here talking about the same things over and over and over again. And like I said, with new information, it really makes you, I mean, it makes me wonder what other people are thinking when exactly they said, oh, well, you're wrong about Trump, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about that, the US isn't going to keep doing this because the change is here. How many times have you guys been promised change over the years? Pretty sure that was Obama's slogan when he ran, and
Yes.
nothing ever changes. Like it's how it works.
And Scott, maybe you don't remember this, but I lived through 8 years of Obama, and I remember Obama supporters saying literally the exact same thing. All of the excuses that people are now making for President Trump, they were saying, well, he was handed all of this disaster to him from Bush. I mean, they were arguing this even at the end of 8 years. Like,
Yeah.
you know, he didn't have enough time to turn it around. And the excuses they were making for all of these wars that he was expanding, wars that Bush openly wanted to start but couldn't. He started, and people were making all of these excuses as if it's justified, just like they're doing right now. They were all complaining about Yemen when Biden was bombing Yemen during his administration. Now that it's their guy doing it, suddenly they're finding all of these excuses for why suddenly now we need to bomb Yemen. And they never stop for a second and question it. Wait a minute. Didn't we vote for Trump to end these wars? And now he's doing it, and we're making excuses for the wars. I saw someone in the comment section just say, well, MAGA is better. It's better than the alternative, which is, you know, the other fake brand slapped onto continuity of agenda, which is whatever President Biden was selling the American people, whatever you want to call that. And no, it's not better. It's just a superficial label stamped onto the exact same policies. So what you're saying when you say MAGA is better is these are the lies you prefer to hear while everything continues uninterrupted. And this is the face you want to see telling you these lies as everything continues as it always has. That's what you're saying. And okay, superficially, maybe you prefer this version of the lie,
yeah.
But it is the exact same agenda the lie is covering up.
Yeah, the thing I always say is you see the administration change, you see the president change, you might see some Congress change here and there, but they're usually in there for a good amount of time. But you know what never changes? All of the money that the lobbies put in, right? All of the money
Exactly.
that all of these people are accepting, all of the money that is required to run a campaign to get into this position of power. Those lobbies never shift. They're the exact same. So policy is always going to be the exact same because the only people who are winning the elections are the people who have all of the money from the few lobbies that make it possible. So big pharma, the military industrial complex, APAC, you know, if you're a politician, you probably got money from them at some point, and you probably have to vote a certain way and act a certain way because you won't be there if you don't do that. And that's what this whole thing is. It's just like a rat race. So yeah, I don't know why people are still delusional, especially people I would consider rather intelligent about this subject. Brian, did you want to move into some questions?
Yes, we can. I just want to add to what you just said, though, about the donor class, the special interests, the corporations, the cartels, if you will, because a lot of these are cartels. They act in cooperation with each other, not only within industries, but across industries, because there's a lot of shareholders and directors on the board of directors who do musical chairs among all of these giant corporations. The Heritage Foundation, which produced Project 2025, if you look at who has funded them over the years, it is all the same corporations that fund, like you said, politicians on both sides, the same people who President Biden's administration represented, the same people now represented by the Trump administration. And I remember people trying to argue that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, he's an outsider. He doesn't have any connections to the military-industrial complex. This is what makes him different, despite the fact that he champions all of the same wars that the arms manufacturers champion. And I remember listening to his whole hearing. I listened to his hearing. the Secretary of Trade and Rubio's hearing. And at one point, they asked Hegseth, you say you want American military generals who are retiring. They have to wait 10 years before they can work for an arms contractor. Are you going to hold yourself to the same standard? And he couldn't answer the question because obviously he isn't. And his final answer was, I'm not a general, inferring that he doesn't have to hold himself to the same standard. And I guarantee you the reason why is because he already has something lined up after his stint as Secretary of Defense. So he hasn't had any direct connections that we know of with the military-industrial complex, but he has lined something up already. So no difference at all. And I remember hearing that, I'm just thinking, these people defending Pete Hegseth, did they listen to the hearing? Did they hear him wiggle and worm his way out of every single question? And is this who you want running your country? And the answer is obviously no. No one with a functioning brain would say yes.
Do you think, I was going to say we should start a betting pool about where he's going to go after? Do you think it's going to be Raytheon or Boeing?
I don't know, maybe. And Anduril is a rising star in the military industrial complex.
It would be interesting to start doing like betting pools on where all these people go after their, depending on which lobbies back them and stuff, where they get their jobs after their stints in office. But yeah, I really don't. They tell you exactly what they're doing. It's so blatantly obvious. They like to tell you what they're doing. All of their think tanks tell you what they're doing. All of the think tanks that all of the think tanks that the people who used to be in power go and work for afterwards. Like Victoria Nuland's husband runs the ISW, right? Like this is not, they like to show you exactly what they're doing. They like to brag about it. They think they're so clever and so smart that they're going to get away with it. So yeah, it's just it's a hot mess. Don't you wish your life was so easy that like a US politician where you could just say whatever you want and make it dramatic and have the entire nation buy into it for no good reason, and then as soon as you get into office you can just do whatever you want? It'd be so awesome. What about Odessa? So this was part of the readout, was the talk about, everybody was making it seem like it was about the ports, the Black Sea ports. What it really looked like to me was talking about safety for shipping. It had nothing to do with Odessa. So no. Then not that that's what this question is about. But do you think that Russia goes that far if the war continues? Is how I would rephrase this question.
I think ideally, if they could, they would want to. They would want Kharkov. They would want Odessa. They would want all of Kherson, Zaporozhye. I think pretty much everything up to the Dnieper River at a minimum. And if they could take the whole of Ukraine, they would. But can they? That's the question. We don't know. And
I think it's very clear that they would have gone all the way to Odessa. They crossed in Kherson and then they were going into Nikolaev. So I would wait and see what happens, but I would not doubt that the Russians see Odessa as a primary objective if the war continues. Absolutely. It was really optimistic. I was really optimistic initially with Trump. I OD'd on white pills. So where do I send my Berletic apology form?
There's a form that you can fill out, circulate.
Oh yeah, somebody made a meme.
Telegram.
Yeah. No, it's you don't need to apologize. Don't apologize. Everybody is capable of being fooled and deceived and duped and lied to. And the more you learn and the more you know, the further you, or I would say the more you distance yourself from trusting people like this, because there's just no reason to do it. So I'm glad that you are awake a little bit more now and that you see what's going on, because it's just right in front of your face. Like I said, they don't hide it.
And I would add, jokes aside, that you admitting that you were tricked and now you can clearly see what's going on. That takes a lot of courage to do, because we were just talking about people who refuse to admit this, even highly intelligent people with a long track record of being objective. They have been swept away by us. And I don't think that they're being dishonest deliberately. I think they have been emotionally swept away and they're having a hard time separate. It's, I always talk about emotions, but it's not like I'm some kind of reptile and I have no emotions.
Yeah.
I deliberately separate my emotions from my analysis, because in the past, when I was younger, I was guided by emotions, and it was always a disaster.
Yep.
So I've made a habit of doing that. And if you can just start doing that, that would be thanks enough. I think admitting that you were swept away and now you realize what has happened, I think that is thanks enough. That's why I do this, is to help people see through this.
Yes, definitely. That comment right there is like the best comment to get. Is somebody, it's not thanking us. It's not, you did say that Brian was right, but it's not about that at all. It's about you understanding the reality of what's happening around you. And that's awesome. And yeah, no, I am a hyper emotional person. So I fully understand what you're talking about, Brian. And I have to consistently, I have an emotional reaction to something, and then I instantly have to step back, take a deep breath, and think about it just with common sense, and understand that my emotions are not the route going forward. If you guys ever see me do a drunk stream, you will fully understand this emotional pull that I have. But
or if someone secretly records me before I calm down and turn the camera on.
Let's see. New packaging, same product, time and time again. Yep,
exactly.
It's a different label. And this kind of question goes, and this comment also goes along with it. I do still believe there is a real ideological difference between liberalism and globalism, liberal globalism, World Economic Forum, etc., and popularism in terms of internal policy. Brian shaking his head no. This is where I might disagree with Brian a little bit. I think that the platter, the presentation that they show up with is different. I believe that Trump says different things and might go about policy in a slightly different way, but the bones are the same. The objectives are the same. So while I do think that the methodology about which a new administration might go about dealing with Russia, Biden might have just been the hammer against Russia the entire time, and Trump is doing this fake negotiation thing, trying to pull Russia away from China now that it's obvious that they lost. The Biden administration might not have done that, but the end goal is still the same. But the Biden administration might have done that. You don't know. We didn't have enough time to see what their plans were heading forward. So while I understand what you're saying, I think it's more like the gift that you're getting on Christmas is going to be the same no matter what wrapping paper it's tied up in, right? No matter what bow is on top of it, the what's inside of the box is always going to be the same.
So in other words, it's a difference in presentation, not really in ideology. These people ideologically are all Western supremacists who want primacy, period. Yep. And everything else is theater, camouflage to target different types of audiences. There might be people in Congress who actually buy into it. I don't doubt that at all. But the people that are feeding it to them, the talking points that they are all parroting, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, whatever side of the aisle they're on, the people in these think tanks, that is their obsession, is primacy, and primacy alone. They don't really have their agenda is just controlling everything. That is their agenda. That is their ideology. So it's just different brands by the same company to target different markets.
I also forgot about Trump threatening Panama, threatening Canada, threatening Greenland, and threatening Mexico. So yes. He is doing the full board. He just hit all the elevator buttons on what to do here. Let's see. If the U.S. strategy is to slow bleed Russia and cut off economic development channels to China over time, how is that a winning strategy?
Well, because their goal is to separate Russia from China, isolate them, and defeat them in detail. They're obviously incapable of taking them all on at the same time. So that's what they're trying to do. And you can see what they're doing, what they have done. If you look at it, zoom out in terms of a timeline also. Eliminating Iraq, destroying Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, the decapitation of Hezbollah's senior leadership. Now they're working on Yemen. it's like a school of fish, and they're picking each one off until there's none left, until only the big one is left. And now he doesn't have the school to hide in, and now he's more vulnerable. This is what the United States is trying to do. That is how it's a winning strategy. And they know that, they could cut all maritime routes. They could have terrorism ravage Russia's Belt and Road Initiative. But as long as China has this border with Russia, and Russia and China have this relationship, it's going to be very hard to starve out their economy, to collapse their economy.
Yeah,
that's why they're doing it.
It's a very long process, and you can see that they failed. They have failed in their initial attempt to pull Russia away from China, which would be regime change, what basically 1990 wanting Russia again would be pulling Russia away from China. They failed to do that kinetically, and now they're attempting to either pause Ukraine to then resume the kinetic attempt later, or sweet talk Russia and Putin into somehow joining the West in some sort of way to then separate them from China, and then eventually, in my opinion, come back. Because when you use a word like pivot, the thing about a pivot is that in basketball, at least, you stay on one foot and you move the other foot. That's a pivot. And the thing about a pivot is you can always come back. You can always pivot back eventually. So a pivot is not a permanent turning to the Pacific theater. A pivot is a temporary turn away from what you're doing with the expectation that you're eventually going to pivot back.
Two things. I just want to point out that the U.S. Strategy of overextending Russia, I think to a certain extent, is working, because look at what happened in Syria. Russia and Iran were both overextended, and they were incapable of sustaining. The Syrian government has collapsed. So to a certain extent, it's working. To what extent, I don't know. And the U.S. itself is overextending itself in this process. I just want to tell Le Chiffre, however you pronounce that name, please form your question into a super chat, and then Scott will read it. And then you can call me all the names that you want under the sun, and I would be happy to sort it all out.
Oh, an anarchist. Neat. How is the U.S. not overextended fighting everyone?
Oh, we were just talking about the U.S. is definitely overextended. I think this proxy war against Russia and Ukraine has exposed how overextended the U.S. is in terms of military-industrial production. This idea that they're ever going to compete with China in terms of shipbuilding is so nonsensical. If you read the think tanks themselves, the experts who if they could wave a magic wand would just expand American shipbuilding, they admit that there are deep systemic problems that prevent it from ever catching up to China. Plus, you have to think too, the U.S. demands primacy over the planet despite having around 4% of the world's population. They think for some reason they should have more of a say than a country like China that has 4 to 5 times the population, a much more massive industrial base, a military at least on equal footing as the U.S. It doesn't make sense rationally. I mean, if you want to be logical and rational, it doesn't even make sense at face value.
Yeah. No, the U.S. is 100% overextended. There's no reason they would be talking about ceasefire if they weren't overextended.
Exactly.
It's why they were overextended in Gaza. Israel was overextended in Gaza, needed to deal with Hezbollah in Lebanon. They got a ceasefire, which should not have ever been agreed upon. Again, don't understand why people are dealing with the West like this. And it turned out to be a mistake. Both sides. It was just didn't make any sense. So yeah, no, I do believe the U.S. is overextended, and that's why they are trying to isolate and prioritize. Isolate Russia, freeze that conflict, prioritize Iran and China, in my personal opinion. So let's see. Could all the Trump apologies be more than hopium? Could our former favorite geopolitical podcaster be falling victim to other indictments?
I don't know.
Is he talking about me or you?
No, I don't. I think maybe they're talking about other people in the alternative media that are apologizing.
Maybe it's apologists.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Look, I think a lot of the people in the alternative media are genuinely just unwilling to accept that
Oh, our
President
former
Trump,
favorite. Okay,
yeah,
there we go.
represents continuity of agenda. I think a lot of them will come around eventually. A lot of these people still do really good analysis, and I know people personally in my family or friends that I know in person. I know people who support Trump, and I know they have good intentions, and they just it's not that
Well,
they can't see
they
through it.
bought
They don't want
what
to.
they
They
bought
want to
the
buy
good
into it.
things he said, right?
Yes.
This is the thing is you're not a bad person for wanting all of the things that Trump said. You're not an idiot for believing that he was going. I mean, yeah, I would say you should know better than to believe a politician and to believe that anything is going to change, really. But I don't blame anybody for wanting those good things to happen. You want peace in Ukraine, you want peace in Gaza, you want non-interventionalism around the globe by the United States. But that's just not reality. So you fall for the promises, but then you need to wake up and understand what's going on. Brian and Scott, do you ever see Europe getting out from under U.S. leadership and realizing its potential economically and militarily, or will it always be a U.S. shill?
Europe has been completely politically captured by the United States. That was the whole point of the European Union as a project. It was a bureaucratic overlay meant like a wet blanket to throw over the fire that was European sovereignty, and it's just been smoking ever since.
Yeah.
And for a short time, say around 2014, you saw Europe working more and more closely with Russia. They were building the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. You saw them working more and more with China. And there was this great hope that Europe would work its way out of the shadow of American primacy cast over it since the end of World War II and get an independent foreign policy and pursue their full potential. And what about militarily? There is zero threat to Europe militarily. They are their own greatest threat. The US is their own great. The only person talking about carving up European territory right now is President Trump, not President Putin, not President Xi Jinping. Is President Trump. He's the one that's talking about seizing Greenland one way or the other. And it's not a joke because he said it way too many times now for it to be a joke. And Ben Norton actually did a recent video about this. It's very good. And he cuts together all of the comments he and his administration have made. And it's just psychotic. I don't know how you could be anti-interventionist and hear this and not say, this is not what I voted for. This is not what I support. So what needs to change is the US as a hegemon. It needs to be undermined and contained sufficiently to collapse this influence that it has over Europe. And then eventually it will. Nothing Europe is doing right now, including Secretary Hegseth's directive regarding Ukraine, none of that benefits Europe in any shape, form, or way. As a matter of fact, all it does is prepare Europe to be fed feet first into the wood chipper of proxy war right as the last Ukrainian is sent through. That's all this is. So it's something that I would like to see. I would like to see Europe working together with Russia and China across on all sides of Eurasia. I'd like to see the US have a constructive role within multipolarism, but the core special interests driving policy on both sides of the Atlantic, they need to be isolated and contained first. And I don't mean the same way the US isolates and contains. I mean just creating an alternative system and leaving them in the corner playing by themselves.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to this question, this is how I look at it. I look at Europe as at least when it comes to Ukraine, I look at Europe as the instrument for the US. That Europe gets to say all of the things that the US can't say about Ukraine, about this proxy war. Britain, France, Germany, they're all talking about talking about troops entering Ukraine, talking about increasing military industrial complex to support the war. Europe isn't hiding the way that the way that the US is trying to formulate and make this appear. Europe is saying the quiet part out loud. And I think it's quite easy to see that no, until something very dramatic and probably cataclysmic happens in Europe in terms of the governments and the populations. And I mean something truly horrible, like it would have to be something catastrophic and paradigm shifting. Then you might see Europe come out from under the thumb. But that event will probably mean that Europe will never be what it could potentially be. So, all right, let's see. What does the future hold for Syria?
But what did the future hold for Libya? I think
Yeah,
we're watching the exact same process, unfortunately, play out. Now, there's some important things to take note of, though. First of all, Israel has advanced deep into Syrian territory. And if you look at a map, what they're doing is they're flanking Hezbollah's positions in southern Lebanon. So what always was a limit to what Israel always has had this goal of reaching the Litani River. So now they're moving up along the Lebanese-Syrian border to the Litani River so they can just cut across. That this has been their dream all along, this strategy of isolating and destroying Hezbollah once and for all. So that this is what they're doing there. They have also cleared out all of Syria's integrated air defenses, which were significantly formidable, forcing Israel, the U.S. There were also European warplanes carrying out strikes across Syria from time to time over the years, over the course of the U.S. proxy war there. That has all been cleared out. So there is now an open path from Israel through Syria to conduct standoff strikes on Iran itself. So that is significant. The way they're preparing the ground for this war with Iran is so deliberate and obvious. And again, why would this be happening if President Trump was the peace candidate? He is preparing the ground for a cataclysmic war in the Middle East. It's so obvious. It's blindingly obvious. And the whole fact that we have HTS, a U.S. State Department designated foreign terrorist organization, officially running Syria, and President Trump is dropping bombs on the heads of Yemenis. They've even dropped bombs on the heads of people in Syria, just not anyone from HTS, not al-Jawlani, the head of al-Qaeda in Syria, even as they are mass slaughtering Alawite and Christians along the coast, Syria's coast, with the Mediterranean. So they are preparing HTS as a proxy force to spread across the region and extremists to spread across Eurasia. And most recently, there has been fighting with HTS forces along the Syrian-Lebanese border. So you can already see how they're employing them.
Which is crazy.
And I warned people this would happen, and now it's happening.
You have Israel invading your country and bombing your country, and you're fighting Hezbollah. It's like so blatantly obvious, and it's just it's gross. It's just gross to look at. And this is why I was a fan of Assad. I didn't care about Syria. I don't care about, I didn't really care about Assad. I wasn't like some, there's the people that were super Assad fans or whatever. I just knew that he was stability. I knew that it was the same with every other individual in that region who has been overthrown, whether it's Gaddafi, whether it's Saddam, whoever it is. You don't have to like them. They can be terrible, awful people. I'm not trying to make an argument for their morality or anything, but I mean, Israel and the United States morality is no better than these groups or these dictators or whatever you want to call them. Assad represented stability in Syria and stability in the Middle East. The second he was forced out, the entire place went to shit. And it's been a decades long project. So, it's interesting. And I feel very bad for the Syrian people. I feel very, very bad for the Lebanese people. And greater Israel is being formed before our very eyes. Does anybody else suddenly feel like eating a boiled egg?
See, this is what you do when you want to make jokes. You form it as the super chat. And I just wonder if,
and that is
I just wonder if is he in the United States? Is all this are you you have no eggs because they cost so much and they're in short supply?
Oh yeah.
You just see like everything you look at reminds you
suddenly becomes an egg.
Two bald guys reminds you of eggs. That's sad. I'll send you some eggs from Thailand.
I'll send you some
We've
eggs.
got plenty.
Yeah, we killed all of our chickens over here. We slaughtered so many chickens, and then we don't have any eggs. Will Putin ever accept a ceasefire or other settlement without achieving the often stated objective of the SMO? If so, why? Fool me once.
Well, I think it goes back to the conversation we were having about the full extent that Russia is overextended.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know. We're not sitting in the Kremlin. We're not looking at the numbers. We don't know how little or how much Russia is overextended. They're overextended enough to not be able to hold on to Syria and continue the special military operation. Plus, there's a lot of other contingencies that they have to keep resources available for, not just Syria.
Yeah.
And so there is overextending taking place. To what extent, I don't know. But if they were to agree to a ceasefire without achieving all of the objectives of the special military operation, it would be because they themselves are overextended. They need time, and they feel like this time could buy them the opportunity to close the gaps that they're facing right now, which I think, honestly, that's why they accepted Minsk 1 and 2. They couldn't have possibly trusted and believed the U.S. I can't imagine it. And I think even President Putin has sort of suggested that they were tricked, but I don't know. I don't know if he wants to. I don't know what is worse, admitting you were tricked like that, or admitting that you were too weak to agree to anything otherwise. It's up for debate.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like at least Minsk 1, you could understand the Minsk 1 situation, right? You're not necessarily overly involved. You saw this regime change happen. You have the Europeans making promises, whatever. Minsk 1 makes sense. Minsk 2, that is literally fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And this third one will be abysmal. If it goes the same way again, like I said, I'm going to be hypercritical of any deal that is struck, if one is struck. Without a crystal ball, if a direct conflict with Iran transpires, how would you see that unfolding? Iranian, Chinese, and Russian response.
It's a good question. I mean, it's so hard to tell because
sanctions.
Yeah. I mean, look, Iran. We see Iran having intervened in Syria and attempting to prop up the government there against U.S.-backed regime change, and it succeeded for a time, and then it collapsed. Why is that? Why weren't they able to prop up the Syrian military? We hear about all of these deficiencies across the Syrian military. Why wasn't Russia and Iran able to rectify this? So there is obviously some sort of overextension taking place. And then if a direct conflict takes place and the U.S. honestly believes that Iran is in one of its most vulnerable states that it has been in for possibly decades, and so they see a huge opportunity here, is that just them imagining that, or is there intelligence suggesting that there is a real opportunity here? There could be missile strikes, there could be air strikes, it could be combined with U.S. backing of terrorism and opposition groups across Iran. There's all sorts of terrorist groups the U.S. and Israel have backed and used over the years. Inside Iran, we have HTS festering in Syria, and they're ready to go up to and across borders to create problems. So there's a lot of things that could play out here, and we just have to wait and see. It's hard to tell exactly how it's going to unfold. Now, as far as China and Russia responding, what could they do? Russia could send weapons. They are sending weapons, but to what extent? Because they're fighting the summation of NATO power in Ukraine, and China does not have the ability to project military power. Contrary to the US's claims that China represents this huge threat to global security, they physically do not have the ability to project military power around the globe the same way the US does. What would they be able to do other than help stabilize the Iranian economy, kind of like what they're doing with Russia, and perhaps sending them finished goods that they cannot acquire elsewhere because of sanctions?
Yeah, I honestly, there's just so many unknowns with this. It depends on how the any conflict transpires. It depends on who's deemed responsible. I mean, obviously, anything can happen. But I wouldn't expect much of an Iranian or Chinese response. I think that any attack on Iran will be immediately, I mean, it should immediately force China and Russia basically to just shut down to any idea of, relations
Yes.
moving forward. Like that's my thought. I would say the US doing that would be the crystallization of all of what's happened over the last 3 years. And it would be a really, really bad move in terms of, I mean, just a lot. A war in the Middle East probably will heavily affect oil prices and stuff like this. Part of the reason why I don't know if we're necessarily going to see it, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think the Chinese and Russians need to respond. I think that their responses will be very quiet and very um, thoughtful. Is how I would put that. I did skip a question here. Why was there such a concerted effort to arrest and even assassinate Trump if there is a consensus? I hear what you are saying on foreign policy.
Because look at how artfully it has manipulated so many people. You have to remember, President Trump literally would get into the ring at professional wrestling events, which is all theater, which is all scripted theater, and he would do the exact same thing. Now, I don't know about the assassination attempt. Look at America. It is a basket case. It is a country eating itself. It is a violent society. There is violence in the streets. You have lunatics shooting each other on a daily basis in America. So it is possible that just some lunatic took a shot at President Trump, and the Secret Service are incompetent because everything in America is deteriorating and collapsing. It is an empire, an irreversible decline. So it's hard to tell if that was staged or if that was just symptoms of America's decline. Do you honestly think the deep state wanted to kill Trump and just simply haven't been able to? Do you honestly believe that? I think if they wanted him dead, he would have been dead long ago. As far as trying to arrest him and put him in jail, is he in jail? And isn't that what Trump is? Hasn't he threatened Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and all of them with? And it goes back and forth, and it forces everybody to ignore the real issues and circle their wagons to protect their personal political proclivities, to ignore reality and what is happening and real danger, and circle their wagons around for these irrelevant issues.
And I do agree with Brian on this for the most part. But what I will add is that in any power structure ever that has ever existed with humans involved, you will see greed. You will see just any gluttony, any human trait will be displayed within any power structure. So you're looking at the U.S. empire. You still have power dynamics within that empire. You still have sides vibing for full control. Like I said, Democrats and Republicans, we talk about a uniparty, but it's not as if they're all on the same side. They just have the same common objective and direction. The pathways of which they will take to reach those can be different, and the money being made is routed differently depending on who's in office. So you can have a group wanting to assassinate a leader, right? Trump, JFK, whoever. You could have, it could just be a crazy person. It could be a internal power struggle. But the point is, if Trump would have got assassinated and Biden would have won, let's say Biden wins the election, none of this changes. We're still here having this same conversation. So yes. I get what you're saying, but I feel like you're just getting lost in the theater and the drama of it, when at the end of the day, the end result is going to be the same. It's going to be the same direction. The wind is still going to blow, is basically what I'm getting at there.
And Scott, I just want to point out that a lot of people are saying, this is revolutionary. President Trump talking to President Putin. Do people remember when under the Obama administration, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton did the reset with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov? Do people remember that? And how they were bending over backwards to pretend they wanted to restore all relations with Russia. It's the exact same song and dance. It's just a different face telling you. Why is it more convincing now that it's Trump doing this song and dance than it was when it was Hillary Clinton? They're both politicians. They both have an established track record of telling verified lies and betraying their promises to the public. Why is one more compelling than the other? And it really does come down to people's personal political proclivities. It's not because there's any evidence at all that says President Trump is more trustworthy than Hillary Clinton. They have both gone back on agreements and treaties and everything else. And you look at the reset under the Obama administration and what that actually was. It was meant to lower Russia's guard so that they could reorganize, rearm, and restart hostilities again in the form of this proxy war in Ukraine. Same thing.
What would stop Trump from pivoting away from Ukraine?
That's a good question. Well, they're not really.
This is what I was going to say. They're not pivoting, and I think if you don't see a ceasefire, there will be
delegating.
No pivot.
Yeah, they're delegating. They're delegating responsibility to Europe to continue the proxy war. Well, it's a division of labor, as Secretary of Defense publicly,
as the people who are running the show literally yelled in your face. Yes, exactly what they're doing.
I ordered Europe to do.
Yeah,
publicly.
What is Russia and China doing with Erdogan if HTS is attacking Hezbollah? Well, China and Russia don't have anything to do with Hezbollah. So, I mean, I don't know what you mean by that. It would be, what is Iran doing? Because Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. So that's more the question. I don't think China. I don't know what China's opinion is. I don't read enough Chinese literature or voices to even know what they think about what's going on in Syria. Do you know what the Chinese are thinking about Syria?
Well, I mean, obviously, anywhere where there's instability, it is something that China is upset about, because instability gets in the way of doing business. Everyone talks about Trump is a businessman; he doesn't want war, but they're missing out how the military-industrial complex is one of the biggest businesses in America. Yeah. China doesn't do that. They don't operate that way. They do business through trade and working together with other nations. So instability in Syria is, from their point of view, inherently a problem that they want to solve. More than that, though, the U.S. has helped channel thousands and thousands of Uyghur extremists from China through Southeast Asia to Turkey, who then crossed over into Syria, joining HTS, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and fighting in this conflict, gaining tremendous combat experience, and now vowing to go back to China and wage proxy war against them, or they will be deployed across Eurasia to attack Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure, which is already going on, but through different proxies, the U.S. arms and backs. So they're very concerned about that, and they understand the role Turkey has played in facilitating all of this. They're under no illusions about this at all. And as a matter of fact, we had, again, talking about continuity of agenda, Secretary Rubio threatening Thailand with both terrorist attacks from Uyghurs. If they said Thailand sent these poor innocent Uyghurs back to China to be tortured, but because they did, Uyghurs are going to blow something up in Thailand. I mean, this is basically what he has said to Thailand, which, when you think about it, is insane. And what is he doing? He is continuing this continuity of supporting Uyghur extremists used against China internally, used against China and its partners around the globe, including you could add Syria to that list. So this is still going on, and the Trump administration is eagerly continuing all of this policy of supporting terrorism around the globe.
Yeah, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this
a reading recommendation.
Yeah, if this is reading recommendations, guys, screenshot that if you want. I'm not exactly sure. All right. Do you believe Iran already has nukes?
I don't know. I think personally, I think they would be insane not to
Yeah.
not to get nuclear weapons. I think they would be insane. People say they're insane. They shouldn't have nuclear weapons. They would be insane not to try to get.
It's a deterrent.
Weapons. Yes.
It just means that if Israel decides to take out your nuclear program, you can respond to Israel, and that will make Israel second guess taking out your nuclear program, or trying to overthrow your regime, or whatever. That if they don't have nukes, they're fools for not secretly developing them. After what you've seen happen in Gaza, after what's happening in Yemen, after you've seen your proxy in Lebanon get absolutely moshed on, I don't understand why you wouldn't do this. This is like the only thing that's going to protect you from what is coming your way. So I think they should, but I don't know. Brian, would you throw away your soapbox and independent voice if offered a contract for big money, government position, and a mainstream media program? Yes. Say yes.
No,
Just say
no,
yes.
obviously no. I mean, like, in all seriousness, I was in the military. I was like 6 months away from ending my contract and getting all of my benefits. And I refused to train, and I was put in the brig for a month in solitary confinement, and I was drummed out, and at great personal cost to myself, because I could not go along with what I had seen and what was going on around me. And I literally moved to the other side of the planet to be as far away from the U.S. and its foreign policy. And I didn't realize at the time just how extensively the U.S. interfered all around the globe, because when I got to Thailand, I noticed the U.S. was interfering in Thailand itself, which is the reason why I began speaking out about all of this. And I could clearly see that what is going on in Syria, if I don't speak up about it in Libya, against Russia, against China, if you don't speak up about it there, even if it's some place you don't know about or care about, eventually it's going to visit a place you do care about. And it has already been visited upon Thailand on a number of occasions. It is a festering threat that Thailand faces. And so, it's you get all this money working for the system, but what good does that do you if they're going to burn your home down around you?
Yeah, exactly. Unlike Brian, I am a complete and total shill, grifter, garbage. So yeah, if anybody offers me anything, I am flipping tune immediately.
He's waiting for this Putin paycheck that just hasn't come yet.
I'm waiting for it. No, if somebody offers me something like that ever, which I doubt they will, I cannot be trusted with such a platform. I would demand complete autonomy of language, of what I got to talk about. If they said I couldn't say something about Israel or something, I would turn it down. It would have to be the perfect situation for me, and I doubt that would ever happen, because I'm a liability. I can't, like I said, I can't be trusted to talk in front of a lot of people and say, stay on narrative the way that most places want you to. So, America is not as powerful as everyone thinks it is. It's nothing but a bankrupt shopping mall. We have no production power anymore. China made 300 times more ships. I would never count the U.S. out. The U.S. has a lot of people. It has a lot of capabilities. And if there is an 9/11, Pearl Harbor, something like that happens, you just watch how fast everybody's going to change tunes. Everybody's going to be kumbaya singing in the streets. All of our internal division struggles will disappear rather quickly, and we will all be goal-oriented. And when the U.S. is goal-oriented, they are a very, very powerful and unpredictable beast. So I would just be very careful about writing off any side like this. It's like saying the U.S. would just absolutely annihilate Iran if they got into a conflict. That could be the case, or they could be stuck there for the next 20 years the way that they were in Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, it's just nothing ever goes to plan, and counting out the hegemony is probably not the best analysis going forward. But I appreciate your comment.
I double that, because people have underestimated the United States. After October 7th, people gravely underestimated Israel's capacity for death and destruction. And I was warning after October 7th. I warned that that was going to lead to flattening Gaza, and nobody believed it. I heard people screaming, "Israel is done!
Yep.
Israel is done!" And then look at what actually has happened. So don't underestimate America. It has a tremendous capacity for murder and mayhem all around the globe. Has demonstrated that over the decades. And even though it is, I believe it is an empire in irreversible decline. I think they're out of touch with reality when they think that somehow they're going to compete with China. All things being equal, China is going to irreversibly surpass the U.S. What they're trying to do is burn everything to the ground and bank on their own ability to rise out of the ashes faster than China. This is what they're doing. They're hoping they can deliver a devastating enough blow. They look at China's population as both an asset and a liability, because if you destabilize a country the size of China with a population that big, all of the catastrophe is amplified by that much more. So it is. We're at a very precarious time. I would not rule out the U.S. or declare multipolarism a done deal. Far from it. There's a lot that needs to be done. It could be years and years before this plays out in the favor of multipolarism, which, by the way, is going to play out for the best interests of the American people themselves in the long term. But we're not there yet. And as Scott just said, if you are tracking a lot of people in America, their mentality, there's still huge amounts of irrational racism. There's people that just want to go to war with China because they look different and they sound different when they talk. I mean, that's
a war with Iran is almost like an agreed upon thing. Like if we went to war with Iran, it's like, okay, we're so preconditioned to that already. I've been hearing that Iran is 2 months away from a nuke since I was like 3 years old. So, I mean, if you talk to anybody around here, I mean, you talk to even about the Palestinians, Muslims in general, it's like we almost don't consider them people. And it's rough having conversations with people about that part of the world because they're like, yeah, so what? Israel's just getting the job done. It's like, yeah, that's a genocide. That's what you're implying there. And you're so upset about the Chinese genocide of Uyghurs, but then you're watching 2,000-pound bombs drop on children, and that's just not the same thing, I guess. So it's a very interesting dichotomy there.
You know what's funny, Scott? Every time that I say there's a huge problem with racism across the West, I always have like these crypto racists like very passionately arguing that they're not racist. If you poke them enough, at the end of the day, they will be making using every racist word imaginable. I just saw this the other day. I was making a comment about these Australians crying about the growing influence of Chinese language in Australia. They're complaining about people from another land coming and displacing them, with no sense of irony that is exactly how Australia as it exists today was created. Yeah. And this guy was trying to pretend to be reasonably concerned about China and its intentions. And some other person came in and just started trolling them until at the end of the day, they were using every racist word you could imagine. And like they really just completely let loose, had this like repressed racism that they were trying to hide. It's so weird. I mean, you think you're the master race and everyone else is inferior, but you're too much of a coward to just come out and say what you believe. I don't know.
It is very interesting. All right, Brian, that takes us to an hour and almost 40 minutes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for being in here and contributing. Honestly, you guys made this stream 40 more minutes of conversation than it probably would have been. So I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you again, Brian. Anything to add before we get out of here?
No, just thanks for having me back on. I think I don't know if you feel this way, Scott, but when you're faced with a wave of emotion like what is carrying away so many Trump supporters, doing this type of work becomes extremely lonely and depressing. You so clearly see what is happening. You're warning people. I warned people this was going to happen. Now people are acting surprised that Trump is bombing Yemen. It's like you were told this was going to happen, and now you're acting surprised and trying to search for an excuse as to why. So it's very frustrating. It's very lonely. So I think people like us have to stick together until more and more people come back to their senses and work hard to bring them back to their senses, because it really does matter. It does matter whether there's huge numbers of people paying into this or not. It will make a difference.
Yeah, I was just talking to my girlfriend the other day. She goes to a different school. You don't know her, and she was saying that she was talking about you. She said something about you, and I was like, "Yeah, Brian. I feel like Brian's like the only person right now that I can talk to, and it seems like it's the only person I can actually like have a conversation with about all of my work stuff that I do, because she doesn't talk to me about that." And I was like, it's so refreshing that Brian connects the same dots as me, because I feel like I'm in a world of people that are just incapable of connecting dots. And it is very nice to have you on. So I do appreciate you coming on. Thank you everybody for staying in here and watching this the entire time.
Somebody, Brooklyn Butterfly Arts is saying that you skipped his super chat.
This one? Okay, let's see.
Yes.
I missed another one too. So
I'm fine. I can do.
Oh yeah, right here. I didn't see this one. Thank you, Brooklyn, for referencing that. I didn't know that I missed your thing. Does the U.S. really want a kinetic war against China, or is the aim to make China Japan 2.0 by choking it off with the Navy and economic warfare? Would they consider this a victory?
I mean, that is warfare. Warfare runs across an entire spectrum. It goes from kinetic war to economic warfare.
Wait, is that the right question?
Yeah, I think that was. This is another one.
Oh, why is the name? Oh, this was the right one. I clicked the wrong thing. My bad. I was like, the name's not the same.
Do they want an actual kinetic war with China? They're preparing for it. They're putting everything in place. The only difference between kinetic war and achieving this creating China as a Japan 2.0, which is their goal. If they could do it without fighting, they always say, we don't want a war with China. All China has to do is just crawl on all fours at our feet, and we won't have a war with China. Yeah. Except China's not going to accept that. And so if they don't accept that, then the U.S. will keep working along the spectrum until they are at kinetic war with China. And this is how dangerous all of this actually is. And the intent is to subordinate another country, to coerce it and subordinate it through force, up to and including kinetic warfare if necessary. And every step along the way is wrong. And China has every right to defend itself against every step along the way of this spectrum.
And it would be, and this is, I see a lot of people always talking about you being so pro-China and everything. You would say the same thing if it was China doing it on the U.S. doorstep, right? Like, the U.S. has every right to defend itself. If China was threatening to choke trade and sanction and tariffs, and it's the exact same thing.
Had troops on Catalina Island off the California coast.
It's like the U.S. does in Taiwan. Who is antagonizing who? Who's pushing whose buttons? Has anybody ever seen China? I mean, I've never seen China invade anybody. I've never seen. I don't hear a lot of Chinese proxy wars that they're funding and arming happening all over the place. So, to me, China is not innocent by any means. I'm not making that claim, but China is definitely put into a difficult position with a lot of pressure on them, and to expect them just to not do anything is a ridiculous position. The same way it's ridiculous to expect Russia not to go into Ukraine when you are creating issues directly on their border, or Georgia, or any other country that this happens in.
It is true throughout the entire 21st century, China has not fired a single shot in anger at anyone. They have not invaded anyone. They have not fought any type of war with anyone. The United States has spent every single day of the 21st century at war with at least one other country around the world, most of the time multiple nations around the world. You will hear people claim that China is going to invade Taiwan, or that it took over Hong Kong. It is literally part of China. It's recognized under international law as part of China. Yeah. Even the United States, every single day about Taiwan, officially recognizes the One China policy, which sees Taiwan as part of China. And they recognize China's position on Taiwan, and they do not challenge it. That is the wording in the Shanghai Communique when they agreed to the one China policy. So again, all of these conflicts, if you follow the money and the political manipulation and coercion and malice, it all leads back to Washington and Wall Street.
Yeah. Well, all right. That's what we're wrapping up. Sorry I missed your question. Everybody, take care. Have a fantastic day. Brian, you have a fantastic rest of your week. And I will catch you guys in here on the next one. Make sure you go check out Brian over at the New Atlas. You can find that link in the description. Just click the @New Atlas. It'll take you right to his page. From there, you can find his Telegram and his Twitter. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brian. I will see you guys on the next one. Goodbye.